Welcome to the Aaliyah Matheson Show. I'm your host, Aaliyah Matheson, and today we're going to be talking about race.
Bum, bum, bum. I'm white. I'm not allowed to speak.
Yeah, Brian's not allowed to talk for this episode, unfortunately, because
my
his
white
white privilege blinds him to the realities of real racial issues, you know?
Although I am Hispanic.
Doesn't matter.
Armenian.
Doesn't matter. When I look at you, I see a white man. A white man.
Do I need to kiss your feet and beg for forgiveness?
Probably. I want to allow anybody who wants to donate to my reparations fund, just go to my Patreon and you can donate to my reparations for my ancestors. How much is my life worth to you? You know, that's what you should tell me with your donations.
Well, no, but if you would like to donate to the Aaliyah Matheson Show, those links will be below.
Yes, which is also my reparation fund. Okay, in all seriousness, we're going to talk about this very deep issue that has been dividing America every 4 years for a long time. Since Obama, actually. Yeah, race. It's a very complicated issue. I feel like I'm in a decent position to talk about this because I am both white. Not really. I'm Jewish, but, you know, I guess Jews are considered white now, even though they would never be allowed in the KKK. But, you know, we're not going to get into that discussion. I'm Hispanic, Panama, and I'm also black. So I feel like I have, you know, the oppression Olympics going on. So I can kind of put in my thoughts and not feel like I'm going to be attacked. Unfortunately, it's sad that I have to say that. It's like, you're not allowed to talk about this issue unless you're whatever. That's super annoying, and I don't believe in that. I think you can have an opinion on anything, no matter what race you are. But either way, I just wanted to say that puts me in a unique situation, and I've been in a lot of different, I've had a lot of different experiences with different kinds of people. So yeah, let's dive into this. So confession, y'all. I, your girl, used to be for BLM. I'm gonna let you guys get all the shock out of your systems. But yeah, I actually used to be all about Black Lives Matter. I used to debate my conservative friends about this topic. So I kind of feel like that gives me a unique perspective too, because I'm gonna kind of come at this topic with why I was in that mindset and some of the things I think even conservatives are getting wrong, and some of the things I think the liberal side is getting wrong. I think there's a lot of nuance, and they just kind of get thrown out with the baby, or what is it, the baby in the bathwater analogy. So I think that it's a lot more nuanced than people want to make it. So I kind of wanted to dive into those nuances and kind of see if we can bridge the gap between both sides, because there are definitely truths on both ends. And if we don't acknowledge any of the liberal side, I think that doesn't put us in a good position either. And as a conservative, there are conservatives who don't truly understand the Black experience, as you would put it, in America. And I will say this, it is a different experience for some Black people, especially depending on where you live. So yeah, here's kind of my, I don't know, Blexit. Candace Owens kind of coined that term, the Blexit movement, the walk-away movement from the Democratic Party, or the walk-away from that whole perspective of feeling like a victim as a Black person in America. And she kind of coined that whole term. But here's the thing. What opened my eyes to what was really going on in America, and that the Black Lives Matter movement doesn't really care that much about Black people, and that it was bigger than just racial issues, was when George Floyd died, actually. And the reason I say that is because when George Floyd died, everybody in America was like, that cop was in the wrong. Like, we all saw the video. Like, everybody knew that cop was wrong.
I have a lot of cop friends. Mm-hmm. and all of them were saying, and on their social medias, they were just saying, wow, like, this is not how we're trained. We would never do this. Like, so it was pretty widespread. It wasn't just, because, usually cops would get the cops back, right? And like, oh no, you guys don't understand how it is. But no, there's a lot of cops that were like, this is completely wrong. So it's nobody thought this was, normal or right.
Exactly. And that's the thing. It's a lot of the Black Lives Matter cases were cases where it was super gray and you're like, the cops were slightly justified. And then, black people are like, no, that's totally unjustified. And that's usually where the debate comes in. I think across the board, we were all like, that's wrong. This guy needs to go to prison. So that's why it kind of woke me up when the outrage started and people were so on fire and like, they made it seem like this was just so normal. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend like black people don't get discriminated against with police officers, some police officers anyways. Like that never happens, because it does, especially depending on where you live. But the fact that they were acting like random police officers are just going out there killing innocent black men. That was the whole narrative, is that George Floyd was just minding his business, and then this cop just, sits on him for 8 minutes and he dies. And that wasn't really the case. When you look at the big picture of the George Floyd case, you see that he was on drugs, lethal doses of drugs when he was being arrested. So it's not like he was just some innocent guy. And that's, again, not to justify his death, but that's to say that he was already in a position of vulnerability. And of course, the policeman compounded that position, and that's what led to his death. But the way that they kind of turned him into this martyr type person, the fact that they were acting like he was just the nicest guy, the gentle giant, and then leaving out the parts of his history, where he, robbed a pregnant woman at gunpoint, that kind of just made me not feel good about the whole situation. And it made me start questioning things because, of course, you don't want to drag people's history through the mud, because that's not the point. But at the same time, if you're going to portray them as a gentle giant and some great, amazing human being, that's when the conservative side tends to start digging into this person's background and saying, oh, maybe they're not the gentle giant that they're being portrayed in the media. And the reason the media does that is because they want people to get angry. They want to see this guy was so sweet and nice and amazing, and this cop just took his life. And like, that's the issue, is it's purposely fanning the flames. And then you have the whole assuming that it was because of race that this police officer did this. I think in America, we have very, let's say, more police violence than any other country. I think that's just across the board with white, black, any race pretty much. Policemen here are a little more aggressive. So to automatically assume just because the officer was white that he was a racist or that he killed George Floyd because he was black also didn't sit well with me. I don't know. There's just no evidence of the fact that he was a racist. I mean, obviously what he did was wrong, but that doesn't automatically make him hate black people, because there was a black police officer there. There was an Asian police officer there. There was also a Hispanic police officer there. So I don't know. It's just kind of, I didn't like how immediately it was like, it's a race thing. Like, there are instances where it's very obviously a race thing, but to assume automatically that it was because of race that he killed him, I don't know. That didn't sit well with me. But anyways, I think I want to go into what both sides get wrong. So the conservative side of things, I feel like here's where we could grow as people. And here's some things that I saw growing up. I grew up in a very white conservative area. So I don't know, there were certain things that made me feel kind of like I wasn't a part of the groups I was in at times, and or feel like my experience was invalidated by certain people in these groups. And I kind of want to address that. So one of the big things was empathy. I feel like when there was a shooting or any kind of thing that did happen that was a racial issue or racial tensions came up, it was automatically just statistics, facts, blah, 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 and no empathy for the family or the victim. And I understand these issues can blow up and become very controversial very quickly, and you just want to pick a side. But we also have to remember that these are real people. They had families and children and wives and husbands, and we can't just throw statistics at a grieving mother, And for a lot of Black people, whether we understand it or not, it like hits them differently when these things happen. And you can say that whether that's because of the media projecting that onto Black people and making them feel like it's a very common occurrence, for some Black people, it is something that has happened in their history. Like they have dealt with family members being brutalized by police or whatever, and it might be completely unjustified in their case. So when they see something like George Floyd in the media, they might get remembered of this situation, and that might hit closer to home for them. And even though we don't understand it, it's still upsetting to them, and we still have to be empathetic and not just totally disregard their feelings. I think we also need to be really careful of the jokes that we tell sometimes. Something that I notice is that conservative people often like to, I don't know, just kind of be a little too loose with some of the jokes that we tell about different races and stereotyping and different stuff like that. And I understand it's like you people need to be less hypersensitive, but at the same time, I think we also need to be careful what kind of stereotypes we're perpetuating, especially kids, because as a kid, there was a lot of kids who would make jokes about Black people, and when you're the only Black person and you're in a group of only white people, those jokes hit differently. So I think it definitely needs to be said that we should be careful what we're saying, and there's truth in every joke. So if you're making fun of people because of their race, or you're and I'm not talking about jokes like, oh, Black people can dance. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about negative stereotypes or associations of being ghetto or things like that, or just being careful what we say, I think is important for everybody, because you really don't want to say something ignorant and have your ignorance, I guess, used as a way of calling you a racist. So, because people say ignorant things all the time, and that's usually what people automatically attribute to, you're a racist. They said this ignorant thing. So sometimes they might not be a racist, they just might be ignorant, but you don't want to be either. So let's just keep it to a minimum when it comes to the jokes and stereotyping. I feel like it's not helpful for anybody. I think it's important also for the conservative side to acknowledge where Black people are coming from and the pain in the history. I think history is important, and it is an important context if you want to understand Black culture. So there are areas in life where Black people do tend to get the bad end of the stick. We see that in the medical community. Black people tend to have more medical malpractice, or they're not taken as seriously statistically, or they're not coming from a lot of wealth. And I know not all white people come from wealth either, but historically, because of redlining and different things within Black history, Black people have had more difficult times in the past getting jobs or doing things. So they're not set up. Their ancestors weren't set up necessarily the same as white people's ancestors. And again, not all white people. I'm just generalizing. So there is...
Are you stereotyping?
There is an aftermath of the civil rights movement and things that do affect Black people today. So in some ways, they do get the short end of the stick sometimes. Not always, and it's gotten so much better. But there are areas where it is more of an obstacle. But that doesn't mean that we can't overcome those obstacles, or that it's impossible, or that we're victims to that. It's just, it is what it is. And we live in a primarily white country. It's more white people in America than there are Black people, obviously. I think we're 12% of the population. So of course there's going to be disparities. Just because you see a disparity doesn't automatically mean racism. But I think it's important to acknowledge that a Black person's experience in America is going to be different. especially depending on where they live. So I just want to be careful as a conservative to ignore that reality, because it is a reality. Especially, I think just being dark in general, even if you're not black, even if you're like Hispanic, whatever, I feel like you're going to be, treated slightly differently, or have been in the past. I feel like it's getting better because there's more representation. But in the past, I feel like you're not going to be considered as pretty, or, those were things that I dealt with as a kid, is like, my hair isn't like a white person's, or I don't have the European standard of beauty because of this or that. Or I had friends who were darker and they had lighter siblings, and their siblings were like considered more pretty than them, or whatever. People are dumb and ignorant, and you're never going to get rid of ignorant, dumb people, unfortunately.
But I do feel like a couple more generations from now, hopefully, it'll be a little bit less of like, that's how you're brought up.
Yeah.
To think that about other people, to think that about black people. I think we're hanging on to it, and there's in my opinion, a certain party that likes to, tell minorities that they're minorities, and to tell them it's going to be hard for you, to tell them, and then the same thing with like the areas that they live in, the ghettos and all that. And I think that's all on purpose. I think they're trying to, make it hard and tell them they're hard, so that way, there's a whole lot of politics involved. I know that for a fact.
No, yeah. And that's the thing is, that was actually kind of leading into my second point, which is representation is important. And there wasn't a lot of representation for black people for a while, or any kind of minorities for a long time in Hollywood and different magazines and stuff. And I think that is important. It's important for kids to see themselves in TV and media, and not it just be a slave, or a R&B person, or a ghetto comedy thing. It's important for us to see pretty black girls in media that are the romantic interest, and not just the side friend or whatever, the background person. I think that is important for kids, and there's a lot more of that now than there was when I was a kid. But I do remember that being an issue for me, of never seeing anyone with my hair type, and feeling like super insecure about my hair because it was black hair and no one I knew had hair like mine. And when I finally met my friend, who was also mixed, she had similar hair to me, that was the only time I felt confident enough to embrace my hair at all. So it is important to have those people, and I do think that that's important. I knew a lot of people who wouldn't date other people who were black, and I think that has a lot to do with the fact that you didn't see black people in the media who were not ghetto and not basketball players or whatever. There was only kind of one stereotype of a black person in the media for a while. So that's completely valid, and I think that's changed a lot in the last couple of years even. But it's funny that you say that about the Democratic Party, because the people who talk about how there's no representation all that.
I didn't say that. You just said the Democratic Party.
You said liberals.
I said a certain party.
A certain party. It's funny because the woke Hollywood people are the ones casting only white people, and then they sit there at their Oscar speeches talking about how we need representation and this and this, and that's true. But it's like, then cast some black people or something. Cast some Asian people. I don't know. Like, you can't sit here and be like, yeah, this is our problem, and then it's like you are the problem then, because your guys are the one who gets to cast things and make movies, not us random people on the street. So yeah, I do think that's important. I think we also have to remember that you're a product of your environment, and whether we like it or not, a lot of black kids are brought up thinking that they are going to have it rough in America automatically. That's what their parents have taught them, and that's what their grandparents have taught them, and it might have been true for those people's grandparents, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's true for their grandkids. And there's actually a movie about that called Fences, where Denzel Washington, he's in this movie, and he has a son who wants to be a baseball player, and he keeps telling his son, like, you're never going to make it, you can't do it because you're not white, blah, 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 because that was his experience, and his experience was valid back when he was a kid. But it's like, the world is changing, and that's what the kid keeps saying, like, this isn't the America you grew up in, like, this is different. And this was this play is written in like the 60s, or like during the civil rights movement time period, so they would have had even more racism back then. So I think we have to acknowledge that it's getting better, even just year ago, it's gotten better in terms of representation and other things. So, yeah, I think we have to acknowledge that Black culture tends to kind of project the parents' experience and the grandparents' experience onto the children and grandchildren's experiences and what they're going to be. And so those kids just automatically buy that. So we have to know that going into it when we're having conversations with these people, that that's what their mindset is, that they've been kind of raised up to think that way a lot of the times. So yeah, that's kind of what brings us into the liberal side of things and my issues on the liberal side. I think a huge issue is conflating racism and classism. There is a difference when you grow up in the ghettos or the projects or whatever, whether you're white, Black, or Hispanic, anything, you're going to be probably treated worse because, and unfortunately, people tend to treat poor people worse. I think there's a lot of Black and Hispanic people more so in those areas. So they conflate racism with classism when really what they're experiencing is just classism. So I think we need to be careful automatically assuming someone's a racist. They might just be, they just might hate poor people. They might not hate Black people. They might just hate poor people. But as Christians, we shouldn't hate anybody, guys. So you've knocked that off. Anyways, loaded terms like white privilege and systematic racism are often used by the left. And I kind of want to dive into those terms just a little bit because I think it's important to have definitions when you're using terms like that. White privilege, I don't love that term. I think that it gets, I don't know, it's just, it's not a helpful term. It doesn't really do anything. And I think when we actually look at the term white privilege, it's like, what does that mean? The left side will say, oh, it means that being white doesn't play a part into, like, it's not an obstacle. So you're never, even if you're poor, your whiteness isn't going to be an obstacle for you. Okay, maybe, sure, I guess, possibly, depending on where you live. It still might actually even be an obstacle if it comes to getting a job. If you're in an area that has a lot of affirmative action and they're just trying to hire minorities to meet a quota, it might not benefit you then. But I understand where this term comes from, that because the majority of America is white, they tend to have more representation and there aren't as many hurdles, or they maybe don't have the historical background of their ancestors being oppressed or whatever. So they might have more wealth or whatever. Like, I understand the term, but I don't think it's helpful. And it's too much of a generalization to put onto people. And I think when we look at the term privilege, it's like, what does that mean? Because there's no inherently wrong thing about privilege. It's not bad that I have all my arms and legs. Is it a privilege? I guess. I mean, sure. If someone who doesn't have all their arms and legs, they're going to have different obstacles than me, obviously. But there's all kinds of privileges. There's female privilege. There's male privilege. I mean, we can't just take white people and say you're privileged, you're a bad person. Like, I don't think that's fair, and it's not helpful in any way, shape, or form. And telling people to check their privilege as if all white people are coming from the exact same American context, it is not helpful. I don't know. What do you have to say about this, Brian, as a white man, man?
Very, very privileged. I mean, my life's just so easy.
Like, Brian had a harder life than I did.
Yeah, I mean, but I was the bad kid in school. You know, I was the clown, and I don't know. I mean, I got suspended all the time, and I mean, I didn't have any breaks that I remember. It's not like they were like, oh, well, you know, if you were a different race, we wouldn't be punishing you. You know.
I think a lot of what it has to do with is the fatherlessness in the home, because Brian's father, he didn't have a father growing up. A lot of Black kids growing up didn't have fathers. I think that's more of the common denominator than your whiteness or Blackness or Hispanicness or whatever, you know, is that lack of having a father in the home puts you at a setback. And is having a father in the home a privilege? I guess, but you don't go, you have father privilege. Like, that's just not a term we use. So that's kind of the same feeling I have when I hear white privilege. It's like, okay, like, how dare you have a father in the home? How dare you, whatever. Like, it doesn't really mean anything when you actually look at it. Another term I don't like is systematic racism. Because in the past, there were systems of racism that were used against Black people within the police department and different things like that. And those systems don't really exist. Like, there's no system you can point to that says that system deliberately specifically persecutes Black people. There's no system you can really point to. Maybe Planned Parenthood, that'd be the closest you could do. But are there individuals within systems like the police department and the justice system? Sure. I mean, I've read books like The New Jim Crow, and I've seen 13th and all of that stuff. And there are, again, there's people in these institutions that are racist and that they have influence, and it might feel like the system is against you because these people have power. That doesn't mean the system itself is designed to keep people down, especially Black people. You could maybe say the system is designed to keep the poor down. I would probably agree with you there, but the poor doesn't equate to Black people. That's, again, conflating racism and classism. So, again, I think these are important things to define when you're having conversations about systematic racism and white privilege. Like, what do you mean when you say that? Like, let's break it down and talk about it, because when you actually break it down, a lot of the times it doesn't mean what you think it means, or they don't understand what they're saying, and they're just using these kind of like terms that are trendy. And I think it's important to define terms when you're having conversations. Another thing that I don't like about the liberal side is that they will try and hold all white people responsible for the sins of their ancestors. And as a Christian, this doesn't make any sense, because we don't hold each other accountable for the sins of our fathers. Like, that's not a thing that we do. The white people I know have never owned a slave. Nobody I know has ever owned a slave. It just doesn't make any sense to kind of, I don't know, be stuck in this rut of like bitterness and anger towards old white people in the history like 100 years ago. It doesn't benefit anybody. I think you just need to like forgive it and move on with your life, because if you're still angry at old white people from 100 years ago, then that says more about you than anybody else, I would say. Yeah. I mean, but if you're a white person and you're angry, you can always donate to my reparations fund. So make yourself feel a little bit better. The other thing I don't like about the liberal side is everything is racist, because that makes literally nothing racist at that point. And I feel like people use the term racist so much that it's like it loses all its meaning. If everything is racist, when something actually racist happens, then no one is going to believe it, because you throw around the term racist so much that nobody cares anymore. And like the whole microaggressions thing, like that was a thing for a while of like, you said this slightly racist thing and it had like racist undertones or whatever, so I'm going to forever hold it against you and accuse you of being a racist because of this thing that person probably didn't even realize came off that way, or maybe it was an ignorant comment, whatever. And then that person is now forever labeled a racist. It doesn't work that way. Like, racism is hating another race based on skin color. It's not making a stupid comment or like, I don't know, reading into every little thing as being racist. And for instance, even the George Floyd thing, we're assuming he's racist. What evidence do we have? None. I mean, if we could find some evidence other than him being a white guy, then sure, call it what it is. There was more evidence for that jogger who was like running and those two white dudes like shot him in the back while he was jogging. There was evidence of actual racism there. They used the N-word. Like, okay, sure, that was a racist instance. With George Floyd, there was nothing you can use to say, oh, they were definitely racist. Like, we just need to be careful throwing labels at people, because it's not helpful and it makes words lose their meaning. And when the actual racist things happen, we don't take it seriously anymore, because everything's racist. Let's see. Accusing everyone of implicit bias is another one. Just because you have implicit bias doesn't mean everyone does. So I know a lot of white people who will be like, well, even I have like racist thoughts or whatever. So all white people have it. They just don't know it. It's like, don't project your racism onto other people. Like, okay, it's not cool, guys, because not everybody is you. Not everyone grew up like you. And everybody has some sort of racist thought when they're angry. Okay, let's be honest. If you're driving and a woman cuts you off, you're like, freaking women. I mean, I do that and I'm a woman. Does that mean I'm a sexist? No, it just means that I'm going to the closest, most derogatory stereotype that I can think of because I'm angry. Okay. Like, people do that. Like, let's just admit we all do that. That doesn't mean you're a racist or have implicit bias or whatever. Okay. It just means you're a human being and you're a sinner and you need to repent.
I usually just look at their car and like see all the dents all over it. And I'm like, yeah, you drive like that. No wonder your car looks like that. Uh-huh.
You judge people by their cars.
Yep.
See, so he's racist against cars. Another thing is slavery has always existed, guys. It existed in Bible times, and it wasn't always a race thing. In America, it was a race thing. It was based on the color of their skin, but they sold slaves from Africa. They sold their own people to England. Who sold us? Like, I mean, it's always a money thing. You can almost always trace everything back to economics. And slavery was just the way the system worked for a long time. And I'm glad that we've come out of that as a whole. Like, that's how the Roman Empire ran, off of slavery. And people would sell themselves into slavery. And obviously it looked different in the American context, where it was based on the color of people's skin and, all that. But slavery as a whole has existed. It still exists in African countries. But I think we just need to put it in its proper context, acknowledge that it happened in America, just like we acknowledge the Holocaust happened, but also acknowledge that there's also a bigger picture of slavery that has existed and still exists today, and that it's just one of those things that it's wrong, but that's how the economics of that time worked, and it's again unforgivable, not unforgivable. God can forgive anything, but it's not something that we're okay with or that we condone, obviously. But we have to acknowledge that it happened to people of all different races. It happened to the Irish. They were indentured servants. We have slavery of, I believe it was the Japanese. I could be wrong on this. Filipinos, I believe, were enslaved for a while. I mean, it's just kind of how history works. So to hold on to history as if we have a monopoly on slavery as Black people is just doesn't make any sense. We also need to stop the blatant racism against Black conservatives, calling them Uncle Toms and coons and whatever else, sellouts, because they don't have the same ideology as the liberal Democratic Party. Like, I'm not a thought slave of the Democratic Party, so don't tell me who to vote for, what I can or can't do, that I'm not Black if I don't vote for you, Biden. We need to stop calling Black people Oreos and all of this stuff because they don't align with what we think they should think, or they don't talk about the Black experience as we've experienced it, and I'm saying we as in Black people, not me, myself, but we need to just knock that off, because that is super racist to tell Black people that they are not allowed to have their own opinions, they have to think a certain way. That's not okay. We also need to stop acting as if nothing has changed, because even as I said earlier, things have changed from last year to this year. Like, there's so much more representation. There's so many more mixed couples, mixed babies. I mean, the more we talk about race and only talk about race and kind of go into this identity politics thing, the more racism we're going to see, because we keep like bringing it up. It's like, if we just stop talking about things so much, and again, I'm not saying we can't talk about experiences of actual racism or things we need to fix, because I'm not for just gaslighting the Black community and not talking about things that they're feeling, because their experiences are valid. But at the same time, if we make everything into a race war and the media just blows everything up and fans the flames, that's not going to fix anything either. So we need to acknowledge that things do change. They have changed. They're changing constantly. It's not the same America as it was a year ago or as it was 10 years ago. So we need to acknowledge that. BLM as a movement really bothers me because I don't feel like they actually care about Black people. They don't care about Black babies and abortion. They're not out there at Planned Parenthoods talking about how more Black babies are killed in New York than are even born. They don't care about Black conservatives. As they said, they call us Oreos, and they make fun of people like Ben Carson for sounding too white. And, you know, that is not okay. They don't care about Black cops who were killed by Black Lives Matter. I mean, Black Lives Matter as an organization is about getting rid pretty much of the nuclear family. It's about ushering in LGBTQ agendas and different things. And they hide behind this "we care about Black people" facade, which is really just another wing of the Democratic Party. All of the money that goes towards Black Lives Matter or Act Blue, it doesn't go towards Black communities. They're not transparent at all about where their money goes. And as far as we know, it goes to white Democratic candidates. And they, again, push their liberal ideology onto Black people, their policies that don't help Black people, like school choice or abortion and things that do detrimental damage to the Black community. And unfortunately, we Black people don't seem to care. I mean, I know so many Black people that support BLM as a movement, and they don't understand where they're actually coming from and what they're actually doing, and that they're not for Black people. They're a Marxist organization. Their leaders are trained Marxists, and they don't denounce the violence done towards Black communities in Black neighborhoods in like Minneapolis, and the Black businesses that were destroyed by Antifa. They proudly stand with Antifa. So all that to say, there's a lot of nuance when discussing these issues. There's people who support Black Lives Matter but don't understand this, and they're not with the organization, but the organization as a whole doesn't care about Black people. So I think we need to really break down labels and define terms when discussing issues of race, because there's a lot of nuance. But we also need to look at ways forward. Forgiveness and repentance and love are the ways forward when it comes to the race issue. We need to forgive and forget. You can't forgive if you don't forget. And I don't mean forget as in not acknowledge, but as in we're not going to hold you accountable for the crimes of your ancestors. It doesn't make any sense. That just leads to self-hate and misplaced guilt. We need to repent of our own racism. If we are racist, if you're actually racist, you should repent because God is not for partiality. So there's that. And you also need to repent if you have been holding on to bitterness and anger towards white people that is misplaced. Or and we need to love each other. If we all love each other, no matter what race we are, race isn't going to matter. And that's how it should be. We're all human beings. We all bleed the same blood. We all bleed red. I bleed red, white, and blue, but that's just because I'm a patriot. I'm just kidding. Okay. Wow. Brian doesn't like my jokes anymore. Okay. Anyways, I think we just need to think about ways forward and what we can actually do to fix things. Like, we get it. Okay, here's a problem. There's a problem in the medical field. Black people are disproportionately experiencing malpractice. What can we do to fix it? Like, let's not just stay there and like sit there. Let's think of solutions that don't require giving money to Black people for their ancestors, white people's ancestors' crimes. There's just stupid solutions. They don't do anything. Pulling down statues like Confederate statues, they don't do anything to actually help Black people. Like, let's actually think of ways that we can help Black communities and do whatever we can. Actual solutions. Like, let's acknowledge that there's issues. Let's fix them. And let's stop dwelling on the past and sitting in bitterness. Like, that is not biblical. It's not okay. It doesn't do anything to help anybody. So that's kind of my thoughts. I know those were very scrambled and kind of, but it's just there's a lot of feelings that come up when talking about these issues because I've been on both sides. So I hope that was slightly helpful for you guys, and you guys can go forward and have good conversations about this. Let's get some conversation started in the comments. And until next week, I will see you guys.